I first met Sara Trail and the Social Justice Sewing Academy actually at a Maker Ed convening, the last year's convening, right? It was last year's convening. It feels like so long ago. I feel like I've known you for years, but I haven't. But from Maker Ed's convening last year, and I was just so struck by the work that is being done. So when we talk about Nation of Makers and talk about what the maker movement does and what the impact of the maker movement is, we talk about that in a lot of different ways, right? We talk about the quantifiable things, like how many people are we touching, and how many things are we making, and how many businesses are started, and things like that. But we also talk about the depth of what we make and why we make, and what our organizations are doing in terms of transformative potential on communities, on youth. And so I feel like Social Justice Sewing Academy, to me, really represents a really important intersection between communities that have not had a voice traditionally and the maker movement. And when we talk about inclusion efforts and how do we get more people of color, and how do we get people from different backgrounds and different socioeconomic status and different sort of class, to work together with people, that are different from them, we look for models, and I think this is a really interesting model. And I'm not going to take it away from Sara, because I want you to hear from her, but I just wanted to introduce her because she's remarkable in her own right. Sara Trail is the executive director of Social Justice Sewing Academy, and she started the Social Justice Sewing Academy to give the preferably unheard population a voice through activist art. She graduated from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education, and she founded SJSA to be a platform where youth art engages and educates communities. She's been a maker since the age of 4, probably before that. As soon as she could get a needle in her hand, it sounds like she knew how to sew. And so she's been sewing since the age of 4 and has been a successful pattern designer and fabric designer, successful author and sewing teacher, and has just been had a remarkable career. At the age of 13, she wrote a nationally published book, Sew with Sara, and at the age of 15, she was in her own series, Cool Stuff, or her own DVD, Cool Stuff to Sew with Sara, which is a DVD released by C&T Publishing. She's been on a number of different media outlets. I could go on, but I won't embarrass her anymore, and I'll let you hear from this wonderful panel, Sara Trail. We also have a youth maker, and I'm sorry, my phone just did a weird thing, Juan Tapia, as well as an embroiderer, Jeannine La Bate, who's also going to be here, and then our own wonderful Kipp Bradford is going to be the moderator for this panel. And I will tell you that I was expecting to be a moderator at the other panel, which is why I had said, I don't want to be the moderator on everything, and I chose Kipp, not knowing that Kipp would have to step in for me yesterday. So it's not, I don't have preferential treatment for board members. I don't want you to think that he's the only board member I call upon. But without further ado, this panel.
So hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Juan and I came in from California, and we have Ms. Jeannine, who's absolutely amazing, who came from Memphis. So I'm excited to share a little bit with you about what SJSA does and kind of show our model on how we elevate youth voice and through social justice art. So let's get started. Want to go next?
You need this.
So a little bit about SJSA is it's a 501c3 nonprofit. So a lot of quilt guilds can donate fabric. That's the main reason we have nonprofit status and get a tax-deductible donation. But the point of SJSA is really to give kids the opportunity to learn how to sew, to make activist art, but more importantly, have their voice heard through quilt blocks that they make. So behind us is a picture of a quilt made by kids, majority in Chicago, and I'll kind of walk you through our workshop model. So, okay, so a little bit about me. Again, I've been sewing since I was 4, and I traditionally started as a traditional quilter with paper piecing, wedding rings. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Simplicity patterns, but you go to Joann's and you pull. I have an entire Simplicity pattern collection of prom dresses, tote bags, aprons that I did all kind of before high school. So Joann's and a lot of sewing platforms had kind of put me as like a young teacher. So I was going around Joann's teaching just groups of kids, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, Girl Scouts of America. I was just like teaching kids how to sew. And it was ranging from just traditional sewing projects. I was teaching them how to make prom dresses, aprons, tote bags, pillows. But the more I was teaching, the more I realized how homogeneously white the groups were. The classes were pretty expensive, and so it was pretty affluent kids that had the opportunity to come take the $75 or $100 quilting class. So when I got into high school, I was like, I want to have some diverse. I want it to be free. I want it to be accessible. How can I create sewing from this capitalistic model and make it more like holistic, so everyone can kind of have access to attend? And Joann's and a lot of like my sponsors weren't on board with that. Simplicity was like, you made patterns so you can sell them, so you're going to continue to teach the classes to kids who can afford to buy these patterns. If kids are poor and we make this model free, how are we going to get clients? So I kind of realized like my internal beliefs were kind of not necessarily going with my, entrepreneur endeavor. So I was like, okay, that's fine. So as soon as contracts ended, I started college, and like my first year of college, I was a freshman at UC Berkeley, and Trayvon got killed. And so I think that was really, the peak of my socio-political development, of when I realized like the quilt world that I was like spending all my time with, the sewing world, the fashion industry, they weren't as up in arms with Trayvon's death as I was. And so I kind of realized like the conflict of interest of where I'm spending my time. This is like my community, and they didn't care. And like that was all I was like, and I was trying to talk about it and bring it up in quilt, workshops, and they were just like, we're here to sew, we're here to enjoy, we're here to have peace, and we're here to get away from our grandkids. And I was like, okay, let me rethink like where I spend my free time. However, my friends weren't sewing, and like it was my favorite hobby. So I think this was the moment where it's like I kind of paused a lot of my work in progresses, and I made an art quilt that featured Trayvon. And this is that one. I was like, 16? And so this is my first art quilt straying away from patterns. So this was the first quilt that I made that I didn't buy a pattern and make it. I didn't, perfect the technique and replicate it a lot. This was the first quilt where I made it. I looked at a photo of him, I made it, and then I went down to Florida and I marched with Reverend Jackson, and we showed this quilt, and we did a whole lot. And it was more so like this quilt is to remember he's not going to be forgotten. Like at the end of the day, and then he didn't even get justice, which is a whole, different ballgame. But this quilt was really to just memorialize, and like a quilt is forever. So the juxtaposition of using like such a comforting medium of sewing, which is like, you think of a blanket, you think of a quilt, something to cuddle in. No one wants to cuddle in a quilt of the face of a murdered young kid. So it's kind of, I feel like, but the quilt community that had loved me so much didn't like this quilt and didn't even let me enter it in any shows. So I think like, being an author at 12, like quilt shows, anything I'd make, they'd accept. The simplicity, no one liked this quilt, and I felt pretty shunned from the quilt community. That was like my home until, I made this quilt, and it was just like I felt off-put, like I felt like an immediate black sheep. So that was kind of like my own personal struggles. So through this, I kind of realized, well, then I need to create my own space where we can have, quilts with messages and quilts with things that anyone can care about, not necessarily like Black Lives Matter themes, but just whatever you care about, you should be able to make and still be accepted in the maker space. So that was kind of my initial, and so then thus I created SJSA, which really just bridges artistic expression with activism to advocate for social justice. So an example of like our full model is we have workshops. Workshops can be anywhere from 3 to 4 hours where we discuss social justice, everyone creates a block, and then it goes through the community quilt process, which Jeannine will explain later. But we also have 6-week summer programs where every kid will make their own quilt from start to finish, which is what Juan did, and he'll show you his quilt later. But a cool aspect of our summer program now is that we have a community action plan that they walk through qualitatively and quantitatively and come up with a plan to address an aspect of that injustice. So if their issue is food desert, their plan could be build an urban garden or feed 50 families. And like we'll help them with a mini seed grant, and we'll do a lot of support to be able to help them through that, like follow through with that plan. And it won't be obviously like change police brutality, but it could be encourage my friends to post on social media and have conversations. So we really help them go from a rooted systemic issue, or their issue could be something as personal as the dress code in my school is a problem. I want to do a petition, and I want to change the language in our handbook. Like it can be as personal or as big as kids want it, but we break them down with steps on how they can address this issue and what are goals that they're going to reach. We don't want to set anyone up for something that they can't really obtain. But that's kind of our summer program. Since then, we've done it in juvenile halls, in prisons, in undergrads, in high schools, in middle schools, elementary schools, and I think it's really just like allowing anyone to have access to feel like they can make change, to empower them to create quilts. The quilts are really finished like really well done because we have a community of embroidery volunteers that spend that like 15 to 30 hours to bring the kids' art really to life. So the quilt community can no longer say, oh, these aren't well made. They are well made because we have this intergenerational collaborative of kids making the art, designing the art, but we have like skilled embroidery artists embroidering the art, and then we have skilled adult volunteers sewing every kid's block together, which makes, like, you can't argue with the quality. So it's therefore been pretty accepted in the quilt world since 2012. So we can go to the next slide. This is like an example of our workshops. We'll go in, this is like a Monday through Friday workshop. Monday, we'll talk about social justice, we'll do root causes, we'll say what matters to you most. Tuesday, we'll work on translating the issue from a system to a visual. So it's like, how do you break it down? So if a kid cares about sex trafficking, that's great, let's talk about it. What are gonna be visuals of sex trafficking? Is it gonna be handcuffs? Is it gonna be a country with a route map? Is it gonna be like, how are you going to show that homelessness? That might be a little bit easier. A bridge, a pile of clothes, a sign. But some issues, kids, income inequality. How are you going to display that without writing out income inequality? So it's conversations about how to take images and theories and systems from concepts to, what you can see and obviously recognize to connect it. Another important aspect is their artist statement. Every kid who creates art makes an artist statement. So then when the quilt, whether the quilt has 20 blocks or it's just one quilt, all their artist statements are connected and they travel with. So it's like there's a lot of reading that you can do if you don't understand a kid's block. So this is kind of our process for workshops. We talk about designs, and it starts with a block design. So those are sketches that kids have made, and starting from the left, Statue of Liberty going on strike, I am Afro-American, self-love, and her artist statement was kind of about the representation of, if you Google beautiful women, she doesn't see herself. So just talking about stereotype threat, or not even stereotype threat, but just more so stereotype normatives of beauty. Video game violence, the bottom of his design is cut off, but it's about end video game violence. He feels like that makes a lot of kids want to, his conception of video game violence, mass incarcerations, LGBT issues, and girls can play sports as well. So a cool aspect of giving kids autonomy over their own design is after they finish their drawing, they show their drawing to a peer in their class, and they say, do you understand my drawing? Do you understand what my issue is? And then if kids don't get it, then when they make their block, people wouldn't get it. So it's like they can say, well, why don't you get it? Maybe they don't know about the issue, so maybe there's something you can do to educate them, or even maybe adding a link to something in your artist statement or an Instagram account. But really just kind of having that peer accountability of, do you understand what I'm trying to communicate? If not, how can I help you get the message clearer? And these are what the finished blocks look like. So the blocks go from, we have issues of everything from saving whales to trash pollution to environmentalism to abortion laws. So kids are really, I think sometimes people underestimate, especially middle school and elementary. Kids are really they're active and they hear about this. And their level of engagement obviously differs depending on their communities that they're in. But I think kids really have a lot to say. It's just, who are we listening to? These are an example of our artist worksheet. They draw their design. They have any instructions for the embroidery volunteer. And this one, the instructions for the embroidery volunteer, they want little people added in thread. So a cool concept. When the embroidery person gets it, they're going to see that the earth is there. They're going to see the accent marks. And they're going to have to stitch in a bunch of little people with thread. That's an example of how the kids are depending on the adult volunteers. And the adult volunteers kind of take instruction and listen, what does this kid want me to do with their art piece? And so the evolution of community quilt, Jeannine's going to explain.
Yeah, what's great is you can follow on Instagram and follow and see the workshops happening and the posts, and then you can make a tag or email and sign up to be a volunteer. And so that's what I did. And then, a few weeks later, for a few days later, you get an email, your block's on the way, it's been shipped, and it comes in the mail in these really cool package. SJSA has stamped it, and it's there written with your name on it. You open it up, and it's a quilt there that sometimes the student will give a message. Can you give direction? Can you amplify this message by adding a quote? And so I take the time to read the quilt, really understand how to best execute and amplify their message, and take the time to embroider it, and then mail it back to Sara, where her long arm stitcher volunteer stitches the entire quilt to then get displayed here in museums and education settings and schools. So it is a 21st century sewing circle, multi-generational, that is able to all have various hands touch and have efforts toward creating an activist art. And these are some amazing examples of some artist statements that we'd like to share with you. The quilts on their own definitely take a close reading, but when you have these artist statements beside them, they hit home powerfully. So she named this is an entire quilt that she created. I'm not my clothes. I chose to highlight how in society today, what you wear is often seen as a reflection of your levels of promiscuity, and any aspect of women's appearance should not be used to explain or excuse rape. As stated in this quilt, I am more than what I wear. This quilt serves as a feminist admiration that one's choice of material clothing should not determine society's judgment of her or solicit unwanted advances. So this is a high school student who's having time to express, visually and through writing, a social justice issue that's important to her. This is one.
So this is the quilt that I had made when I was in Sarah's class, 2016. The quilt that I had made was inspired by gentrification, and the message across it was, you can't gentrify this because, like, something that you create, nobody could tell you it's wrong. Like, you make your own message, and I feel like it was powerful at the time because gentrification had hit the Bay Area really hard. The rent prices went up, and in most places, like the place where I was living is Richmond, California at the time, they don't have rent control. So like overnight, they could make your rent go up like $300 and you can't do anything about it. You can, like, not even a lawyer could do anything about it. So we had to move back to Oakland where there's a little bit more help, but then even like the subsidized housing is like a 5-year wait list. So that's a issue that was important to me at the time.
Born a crime. At first, I couldn't think of any social justice issue to sew that would directly relate to me until I realized the value of my experience as a young Black man in society. In an effort to bring awareness to an epidemic of killing unarmed Black men, I carefully situated as many names as I could on the quilt. While the entire Black family is mourning the losses, for me, I especially mourn the loss of what could have been for my older brother. That's Brian Robinson.
So these two are two quilts made by high school kids that have won. Well, the right one won, and the left one, although it's been a quote in terms of what the current administration has referred to Colin Kaepernick, it's been like eliminated from over 12 quilt shows. And it's really ironic how much censorship the quilt industry and quilt world in general will have. A lot of people will they'll say, oh, you can bring kids quilts. So we bring a bunch of kids quilts, and they'll say, this one's got to come down, this one's got to come down, as well as this one, which I think kind of is just reflective of the quilt industry as a whole. Cussing on quilts, although it's a quote, isn't still acceptable in the quilt world. So there's been lots of quilts. We have a quilt that's about women's rights, and it depicts like a naked female silhouette. That'll get taken down as well. So I think in art museums, they have a little bit more, you can have whatever, but in the quilt world specifically, just showing at quilt shows, the amount of censorship these kids' quilts get, it's pretty alarming, especially when, I'll bring 10 kids and then 2 of their quilts get taken down just because the quilters do not like them. So Karina's quilt hasn't been shown many places, so I thought I'd put it on the slide, and it kind of just depicts things or tweets, that Trump has said, and then the one on the right is called Exit Wound, and her whole quilt is themed off the Parkland shooting. And so her quilt, the Exit Wound, the size of an AR-15 is the radius of an orange. So those are life-size oranges that she's measured, a bunch of radius. And the oranges depict things inside of them. You have to really see the detail up close, but it says things such as toxic masculinity and NRAs and just things that are the fruit of systems that, allow people to have guns. And her artist statement really asks, obviously it's a dead, male that could have been a graduate, but his life was cut too short. But really just her question is what's the point of AR-15s if in general? So she just feels, her artist statement is about feeling unsafe in school. Her artist statement is about having forced school shooting drills, and just it's hard to focus on learning in school when you're constantly reading in the news how schools are often, being shot up. So that's an example of other quilts that kids have made, and these are, again, in our longer program. Our workshops, kids make a block. We send the blocks out to be embroidered. Our longer-term program, kids make a quilt from start to finish. And today we have pins and patches that Juan has that kind of support, Ubering kids here and from workshops, buying lunch, those kind of things. And so now we will, this is kind of the question that just kind of matters in SJSA, and regardless of where we bring workshops, where we bring programming, it's really about just elevating youth voice regardless throughout everything. So it's never we start a workshop, we're going to tell you what to make, you're going to make it A to Z. It's really, we're going to provide the materials, have a safe, or even not safe, we're going to have a brave space where, your ideas can be challenged and everyone can really talk to you, and then you're going to create what you want.
Great. Thank you for giving us a very useful overview of the incredible work that your organization does and bringing people who are involved with your organization. I want to start, I'll start the questions with Juan and Jeannine to help the audience get a more direct perspective of your work, and then we'll come back to you with a few questions about how you got into this. But yesterday when we were going over the Q&A, Juan had mentioned that you nearly were killed by a bullet at a friend's memorial, and that you had been in the gang, but that really one of the things that's saved you has been this quilting project. And there are two issues that I thought were really interesting. One that I think would be really useful to hear more about that story, how you got involved and what your reaction was. But also, gangbangers are not known for liking soft crafts. And it's a very interesting story to hear, like, what was the perception? How did you feel when you were thinking, like, oh, I'm going to be doing quilting? Like, what was going through your head that your friends in the gang would think of you if they saw you quilting?
So the way I got into it was I had caught my first case when I was 11. I had it for grand theft. I had robbed a store with my older brother, so that was my first case ever, the first time I ever went in and dealt with the police. The second time I had got arrested, I was 13. I was at a BART station. I got arrested for aggravated assault. And then I was 13. I was doing 2 weeks in juvenile hall. As soon as I got out, I went right back in the next year I think I was getting kicked out of schools left and right. So I went to 4 different high schools. After that, I got kicked out of my first high school for I was already on gang database. So I was getting into fights and they pulled me out, and then I got expelled from that district. So I had to move to a different city to go to a school in a different district. I ended up going to a school in Richmond. The programs out there aren't as they don't have as much resources as the ones in Oakland, because I'm originally from Oakland. So when I moved out to Richmond, it's harder to find resources, basically. And the only resources that they actually had for kids like me, that were getting into trouble constantly and always getting kicked out of class, was a program called Upward Bound, which is a college program for low income students. So I was taking classes at Berkeley, and the funny story behind it was that every group got assigned a project, something cool, like one group was making a roller coaster with marbles, and they were testing the laws of physics. And then another group was making rockets with pressurized water so that they could fly in the air as many feet as possible. And then another group was they had went to Great America to test out certain things, and another group was making all these cool things. And there was choose from 1 to 5 which one you want to do the most. And I ended up doing the sheet backwards, and I got into Sarah's class. And and I think it was crazy because I didn't want to be in that class, and because like he said, gangbangers aren't really known for doing soft crafts. So my first initial response to being in that class was I don't do sewing. That's a girl thing. That's perceived as a girl thing because of the gender norms associated behind it. So after I was in that class for 1 day, I was asking to get switched out. Sarah had told me to try it. I was all right, whatever, I'll try it. Just because I didn't want to deal with having to transfer out of one group to another group, because I already knew that it was gonna be a long process. So I ended up just taking the class. There ended up being a lot more boys than girls, so it wasn't as weird as I thought. Brian Robinson, one of the people who had the quilt right there, he's like my best friend, so he got in that class too. So I was like, I wasn't as like mad about it just because I knew somebody that I knew was in there too. So we both did the class together, and yeah, that's how I got into her class. But I perceived it differently as like as any male, I guess, would coming into it, because like at home, like if I needed something fixed on my clothes, the first person I would ask is my mom. But like unfortunately, like I didn't grow up with a dad, and my mom was in and out of jail for like 8 years. Like half of my life she was in and out of jail, so like the other half I was just in the streets doing my thing. So I seen sewing as like, oh, if I couldn't get a female to do it, I wouldn't fix it. I'll go steal clothes, brand new clothes. So that's I kind of took it in as weird, but I ended up actually liking the class. Oh, the process was first we talked about social issues in our class, social injustices that we had in our community. Then we took like printer sheet paper, started making like designs and drawing stuff out, putting out quotes and things that would correlate to the quilt that we were making. And then afterwards we do like the raw edge applique, which is just cutting out the shapes, like just basic shapes like letters and buildings and squares and all the stuff to start creating the actual image. And then later we glue everything on, make sure everything is where you want it, because like sometimes you could put something backwards or misspell things or like mess up your design. So you make sure everything is in place before you glue it. Then Sarah had us try to like stitch it. I don't. It was my first time ever doing something like this, so it came out. I don't know. I guess to me it was kind of ugly, but to other people it was like, for your first time it's good. Then she actually had like the volunteers come help us, so it was pretty cool.
So the process goes from you, where you come up with the idea and have this powerful tool for expression, self-expression, and then people who are more experienced quilters get involved. So what's the handoff there? After you've done your piece, what happens next?
After you do your piece, well, the volunteer that we had during the summer program, her name was Robin. She's like a nice lady. She was like familiar with like all the tactics in sewing, and she was like just really informed like with fabrics and like different things of like that nature, because I honestly didn't know anything about it until I got into it. But she knew, like she was like an expert, so she was helping us try different stitching and different using different materials, because I didn't know that you could like use different materials. Like, so some of the fire in there is like this shiny little material that like I didn't even know that you could like sew onto like fabric. So that was cool. And just looking at different patterns, because like the letters that I wanted to use were like really plain. Like everything that I wanted to use is like just plain. Like I didn't know where to start, so I just started picking out like plain block fabrics. And then they were telling me like, no, you could add different colors, different patterns. Like it doesn't have to be just all like monotone or all just one single color or anything like that.
You're one of these volunteers.
Yes.
And bring this expertise to the next stage of the process. How did you get involved?
Yeah, I have a similar background in sewing and fashion and in art, visual art. And I, throughout my undergrad and graduate studies, participated in these sewing and costume design, and it was all very exciting and storytelling, but it got to the point where I was just frustrated with what was the point? What was the point of putting on these stories? Like, who is our audience? Like, how are they changed? Like, I know we move an audience from an emotional place, and storytelling is so powerful, but personally I just exhausted and became more critically conscious and wanted to offer put my efforts toward making art and sewing for a cause that was important as a form of resistance. And my professor recommended the Social Justice Sewing Academy, that I follow them, and I was just blown away by what Sarah was doing. So my first quilt that I received, it was an LGBTQ form of resistance, and was celebrating, because it was around that time when marriage was becoming legal in a lot of states. And my art background, I was like, I want to do, more rainbows, and I was thinking design elements. And then I recognized that I was not going to impose, again, these sort of artistic, aesthetic I needed to like step back and understand like what would best amplify this message. Like how can I serve this student and their cause, so or their injustice and or celebration. And the more I began, and I didn't have much embroidery experience. Sewing was one thing, but embroidery crafts I'm new to it. I was definitely a beginner, and I'm still a beginner. But it was just taking it stitch by stitch, running stitch, and then the more that I was able to do that, it just every stitch became. I was but doing it, and it was this process that I've just been fortunate to keep doing. Mm-hmm.
How long did the process take you for your first quilt?
Yeah, it's a process because just depending on what quilts I get and the level of knowledge that I have about a different issue, I definitely take time to research a lot and read a lot about what the cause is or what the injustice is, so that way I can, again, be more informed. This youth is informing me, is teaching me. They're giving me a glimpse into their life, into their real lived experience. So I would, and I'm again slow. I'm not really quick with embroidery. I'm getting faster as I do it, but probably like 20 to 30 hours, and that's probably 25 hours just including reading and research and time to just take it in and contemplate. So yeah, it's commitment, but that's the form. This is what I can offer. This is my action of activism. So I think that's not a lot considering the stories that, the issues that are being experienced by these youth. So for me to give 30 hours of my time versus what their lived experience, it's.
And so how you've done 4 quilts so far? Mm-hmm. Over the arc of those 4 quilts, how has that impacted you?
Yeah.
How much connection do you have with the students whose quilts you've received?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I guess it's been about a year and a half, or 2 years. So over the course of 2.5 years, or a year and a half doing it. Each quilt that I receive, I become more educated and more critically aware of the issues that youth are facing, and it gives me a sense of motivation to keep understanding their voice, because I could pick up the newspaper, I could go to these news outlets, I can go on social media, but at some point it just doesn't land, like these issues that are here, I could read about it and then just go about my day, but there's something about getting these quilts blocks that it lands on me. I can't just, breeze through and just keep scrolling. I have to sit with it and I have to stitch about it. And so it's giving myself the accountability to keep raising my critical awareness, of these really so many injustices, that we have in society. Mm-hmm.
And now, Sara, to you, you've created this pretty impressive network of 1,000 experienced professional quilters. How did you recruit those people, and what's the broader reaction? Like, what happens when someone gets a quilt with a topic that they don't agree with, or that they don't accept?
They email me very upset that they want a different one. I've had a few. I would say the majority. We have over 1,000 volunteers. We have at least 50 international. So like postage to Paris and Barcelona and France and Spain, and it's pretty expensive. But in addition to that, like a lot of times, like it'll be a anti like men allowing, like it'll be pro-abortion. I'll send it to someone in Idaho. They'll send me an email. I got this block. Me and my husband don't agree with this. Can we have a different, I still want to volunteer for you, but I don't want this block. And I'll politely say, as politically correct as I can manage, you don't get to pick what issue you want when you sign up for SJSA. You've agreed to commit to embroider a piece of youth art. Whether you agree or disagree, that's not your job. It's for you to stitch it down and permanent, like seal it with your embroidery stitches so it can be put in a quilt. And so I just kindly remind them of their job. They're not, this isn't for you to judge and agree. It's really just for you to stitch. You're doing a technical skill. It's not about your opinion. And it's not your art piece. Like, it's definitely a collaborative model because you are securing everything, but the point of the embroidery is to just secure everything, because if we just have glued fabric and we take it around, eventually it'll wear off. So the job of, their part is to secure it. It's not to agree with it. So I kind of just remind them of their position and can say, if you agree to sign up again, I could maybe try to not send you this issue. But, we can do a workshop traditionally in a high school. the teacher will give us their 1st through 7th period. That'll be 30 kids times 7. That's over 150 blocks by the end of the day. So I need 150 adults to all embroider 150 kids' art. So it's like I can't be picking and choosing, oh, Becky in Nebraska doesn't want LGBT and Holly doesn't like, environmentalism. She doesn't believe in global warming. Like that's too much work. So it's either you agree to sign up, blindly and you just are supporting Youth Voice regardless, or this isn't the project for you.
How did you, thank you. Two-part question. First part is, how did you find those 1,000 volunteers? And second part, how many of those volunteers are men?
3 are men. And they're very, and we have a trans woman, so, but still not men. But regardless, so the first one we did a workshop, and I had 3 volunteers, and we sewed every block. And not only did the block quality go down as we got to the end of the pile, but we were like burned out and we realized this isn't a sustainable model. So then I said, well, why don't we ask our friends? Like if we could each take 10 blocks, then we each ask a few friends to embroider. So it was really like a Bay Area grassroots network. And then I was like, well, what if we all posted on social media and said, can anyone do this if I mail it to you? And my mom was like, Sarah, that's implying someone's gonna mail it back, finish it, buy the thread. Like you'd have to send them a pre-cut kit. And I'm like, kids use like, oh, we have 100 pieces of fabric. I don't have 100 pieces of color thread to, like, we need someone who already embroiders so they already have their own thread. And mom's like, Sarah, you're gonna send this kid's art out and it's gonna be taken, no one's gonna send it back. And I'm just like, you know what, I'm gonna have to run this risk because it's not sustainable unless we can't, like, it took us 4 months to finish one quilt. Like, it wasn't sustainable. So we all posted on social media. We hashtag embroidery. We tagged a bunch of embroiderers, and we had a few people who had like a few thousand followers post it, and then we got 10. And with the initial like first workshops that we sent out, one requirement was please post it on social media because we need more embroidery volunteers. And so through the Instagram network alone, within like 3 months, we had a few hundred volunteers. And then, I'd send them back to the same volunteers. And I said, guys, if you just please show it on social media, we can have a network big enough where I'm not asking you to do a block every month. Because 30 hours of someone, especially young moms, and I mean, everyone has a life. So it's like, if you could just do one a year, but we have a lot of people, we'd be okay. But then we have some amazing volunteers like Jeannine who will do a few a year. But they are a big time commitment and balancing their own sewing projects. I feel like a lot of, there's a few, I guess, power dynamics at play. One, sewing is very much about credit, as is lots of art. So if I'm gonna spend 30 hours on something, I want my name attached to it. And a lot of volunteers have emailed but it's very clear when you sign up, the artist's name is the only one associated with this block. You are a selfless volunteer that's not going to be getting any credit. I mean, you can post it on social media. You can always share, I embroidered that block. But at the end of the day, the block is about the design. You're securing the pieces. So first off, they have to know they're not getting any credit. And that's not in an attempt to like demean. Sometimes the embroidery work is absolutely amazing, more amazing than the art the kids cut out, but it's still about the art the kids cut out because it's still about their message regardless of their talent level. So that's like the first level of like selflessness. Second is like embroidery is really expensive. The amount of like an embroidery artist can embroider a 6-inch hoop of a name, a floral wreath or something, and sell it on Etsy for easily $150. Embroidery is expensive. Embroidery is time intensive, labor intensive. It's really an act of love to embroider not only a piece of art that you might not ever see again, but especially a kid you don't know, and especially like the cross. I would say the income, like sometimes people will sign up and they won't put their zip code, but I have their address. I'll Google their address. These are some millionaires, like living in from Silicon Valley to Palo Alto to Calabasas. These are some straight millionaires that might really not be interacting with kids in Chicago ever. And I think a really important aspect is when we have workshops, especially in the Bay Area. We've done workshops in Baltimore, Texas, Atlanta. We've done some in Florida. The volunteers who come out really aren't used to working with this type of demographic. And sometimes volunteers will be like, they're cussing, and this is their space. You're coming in as a volunteer to help them create the art. You are here for your skills. You're not here to police. You're not here to judge. You're not here to mother. Like, you're literally here to bring the skills while this is their space. Like, this is a space we're creating for them. So if you want to come in and tell them to pull up their pants, stop sagging, or anything else, it's really just, it's their space. And so that's kind of like a quick, debrief conversation we have with volunteers before they come in. But it's really about like just creating youth space and really no rules. There's no rules in what they create. There's no rules in how they do it. Whether they want to add a cuss word, an explicit, a nude body, however they want to create something that matters to them, we're going to support, and we're going to give them the technical skills, and we're not going to hit them with a barrage of color theory or you need to use this color contrast. It's really like whether it matches or doesn't match. It's what they create, so just support them in that. And if they need help, like how do I cut out letters? You can show them a technique that'll be easier. You can show them how to write on the opposite side and cut it so it shows the right side, or you can, help them pin things out, but really you're there to support, not, overtake the space.
You've done a really good job of creating some amount of qualitative data on the impact on both the quilters and the students that you're working with. How much work have you been able to do to quantify the change in lives, the change in trajectory, like the story we heard from Juan? What have you been able to do on that aspect?
So in terms of numbers, we've done workshops with over like 2,500 kids. So in terms of stories, it's really about kids just emailing back. For example, like qualitative or quantitatively, like some kids will say, hey, that's my block. The embroidery volunteer on Instagram who says, oh, this kid made the block, will follow. And like kids will say, hey, Sarah, this random, white woman always comments on all my stuff, and I have a whole internet friend. So I think like qualitative, there's some cool stories of that. Additionally, like one kid, for example, this is how amazing the embroidery network is, and also how trusting, because they're quilters. So there's a level of safety that there already is with like people who are quilters. Just inherently, I'm gonna have trust for this community. We had a kid from a workshop. She's the one who made the ABC quilt. So before you guys leave, one entire kid made the ABC quilt in the room. She's a foster kid living in a group home. So I went to her high school, we did an entire workshop, and then after the workshop, she's like, hey, can I have some extra blocks so I can make my own quilt this summer? And I was like, yeah, of course. So I gave her some extra blocks. I gave her all the fabric from the workshop, so she had everything. She went home and like via just Instagram and texting, she'd be like, hey, I don't know what to make my quilt about. So she came up with the theme of the alphabet, and then she wanted each letter to correspond to a social justice issue. So like some letters, she'd be like, I don't know. And I'm like, let's just post it on Instagram. What social justice issue starts with G, or what social justice issue starts with I? And people, like, she'd have a good idea, but she didn't know a visual, so she'd want a different issue. But basically, there was one week where, her foster mom was leaving, and she, like, needed a place to go, and I was like, I'm in California. I don't know necessarily how to help a kid in Baltimore. I mean, I'm in college myself. So I put on Instagram, is anyone, in this area that would like to host a kid for a week? I had 7 women sign up. She went to a random embroidery volunteer's home for a week, and I mean, they did field trips, and like I think that's just the level of how much the volunteers that sign up care. And it was a retired mom who had grown kids who were out of the house, whose husband like worked at NASA, and I talked to her on the phone. I shared location with the kid all week, but other than that, like she was good. And I mean, she texted me like, hey, we're going to this all day. But like the level of care, like giving rides to kids, giving food to kids. I mean, Juan still keeps in touch with Robin. So it's like I really feel like the people who, like, even though they might be from a distance, if ever there's a need to step up, the volunteers who really care. And I think that's the most powerful aspect of this community. And like, I could have a kid in Texas, and I could ask my embroidery volunteers, is there any embroidery volunteer in Texas who could help this kid with A, B, or C? Whether that's, housing for a few days or just encouragement in general. I think the sewing community really supports these kids. The quilt community in terms of quilt shows is a different ballgame, however.
But you're an all-volunteer organization, so which I want to point out that all of this work is being done by volunteers. So I'm through my list of questions, but I want to open up to the audience, and we're going to run, since we started 10 minutes late, we're going to run 5 to 10 minutes late, probably closer to 5. So I'll do what I did before with the mic in the audience.
So across the middle of America, gathered in church basements are groups of 5, 10 grandmas making blankets, making quilts for veterans. They're used to doing stuff that they don't have their name on. How deeply have you penetrated that group of volunteers?
I would say pretty heavy. I think a lot of our volunteers are like, oh, I do quilts for veterans. I do quilts for Pulse Massacre. I do quilts for, I think quilters that, volunteer. I think, however, quilters and embroidery is 2 different things. So, but I would say for the most part, skills are pretty transferable. And just like Jeannine, if you don't know, you can learn. Because you'll get the block, you'll get instructions, and if you need help, YouTube it.
So Juan, how has this changed your life, and what are your plans for your future now?
After doing the social justice workshop, it changed my life dramatically. but as most people know, that once you're a gang member for life. That follows you for the rest of your life. Like, I'm not as active as I was when I was younger. I got into that gang when I was 12 years old. So for the problems to still be following me at 19, because that shootout happened 2 months ago. And now I work for like a social justice-based nonprofit organization called Courage, which is Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, which focuses on helping formerly incarcerated and systems-impacted youth. Well, systems-impacted youth means like children that usually have their mother or father that's been in the system before, low-income housing, like welfare, like on EBT, like food stamps and stuff like that. And we try to find them like internships. We actually run an internship. Right now I'm running an internship with like 12 kids, teaching them how to do Photoshop, because I actually like, while I was getting out, I actually joined like an IT academy and learned how to do like Photoshop, and I was getting paid to take classes like animation and stuff like that. So I help kids do like their own thing. I started getting into screen printing. Now I help kids like print out their shirts for their own brands and stuff. So based with the organization, we help like formerly incarcerated people get out of like the whole systematic oppression by getting them back into society and rehabilitating them, like getting them like the help they need. Like if they need to go to rehab, we try to find it. If they need housing, we try to find it. If they need a safe place, we try to find the first and best places that we can place them in. If they need anything, any assistance with like immigration status, we try to find them the quickest lawyers that are gonna help them with that. Over the times, I realized that it wasn't something that I wanted to do. Like gangbanging isn't forever. So I realized at a pretty young age that that's not what I wanted to do, and I had the option to either destroy my community or help rebuild it, and I chose to rebuild it. After seeing my younger brother get shot in the chest, I kind of realized that that's the road I wanted to take.
Do you think if you're persistent in the quilting world, they'll finally come along and stop taking down your quilts?
Inherently, I really don't. I think we're gonna, instead of having to like rely on the quilting world, we're gonna have to create our own system. Like inherently quilt shows, there'll be a quilt show, there's never an 18 under category. Like we have to fight for a space for, like quilt shows are for amazing quilts to be shown. Kids quilts and youth quilts and first time quilts in general are never quote unquote good enough to make it in the quilt show. And it's like, but the people in quilt shows have been quilting 20, 30 plus years, and a lot of them are retired and have done nothing but work on one quilt for 3 years. So I think inherently we've got to like push against the systems of what the judging criteria around quilts are, and about like who gets to be a quilter, who gets to get their art published in, you know, quilt magazines and quilt journals. A lot, like Teen Vogue came in and interviewed, you know, some of the kids, and they've kind of said, oh, like you can be using, you know, quilting for a different medium. But I think inherently the quilt world's got to get with it, because if not, the craft and industry alone is gonna die out. It's like, besides teaching your grandkid how to make a quilt, like you've got to inspire kids to do what they want without the strict rules. Quilting comes with 1/4-inch seams. Seam ripper is your best friend, and it's like picking out mistakes. No one wants that to be their best friend in their first class. And but I grew up in that indoctrinated quilt. If it's not a 1/4-inch seam, I'm gonna pick it out because no one's gonna accept my quilt unless these seams are perfect. But SJSA is really, there are no seams, there are no rules, there is no, like the quilt industry, like the guidelines we really don't adhere by. So it's really empowering to give kids whatever you make, regardless of colors, it's gonna go. But if this quilt were in like a traditional show, they'd say these colors don't match, these aren't complementary. Like they judge on that basis, and it's like, it's about the message. If art doesn't make you feel something, then really what's the point? Like if you can't think of something or be inspired by something or want to do something, like I can admire this quilt of like, you know, colors going from purple to blue, but like after I admire it, what next? Like I feel like the kids' quilts you can look at and really think about something, or change your opinion, or I mean just even gain empathy, start conversations. Like there's just so much more we can do with our time, and I feel like for a lot of the kids, and myself included, too many things are happening in this world for me to make something that's not going to make a difference in any way.
To kind of continue on the question about the shows, what other things happen with the quilts after they're completed? Do you take possession of them? Do the students take them? Do they end up in the schools or art exhibits? What happens to them?
So after quilt shows, a lot of museums, kids get them back anytime. So if Juan says, hey, I want to show my quilt to this, come pick it up. We'll mail it to you. But really, like a lot of places just show them, and like it's about bringing the kids the platform to speak. So it's like Harvard showed all these quilts. UC Berkeley wants to show a lot of quilts, and like the JCC, which is the Jewish Community Museum in San Francisco, they showed the quilts, and I'll invite all the kids. Juan's one that'll be like, oh, I'll go speak. A lot of the kids are shy. They'd like, just read my art statement. I don't want to go speak. So it's really about showing the quilts in lots of places, but inviting all the kids, as long as travel could be covered, so they can come and speak about their own experience and their quilt. It's really about giving them like youth voice back. But yeah, and some of the kids have opted, I want to keep my quilt, that's fine. Some kids would say I'd rather it be exhibited, but really quilts get the agency, and collective quilts that are made by everyone, the school will eventually get it back.
And I just want to add too, just even going out into public spaces as an embroidery volunteer, like I'll bring a block to a coffee shop or a restaurant, and I'll sit there in public and stitch, and I have people who are so intrigued by what I'm working on. Older gentlemen will come over, or women will say, my grandmother, or what are you sewing? And it ties back to someone in their family that they know that sews, and they're sharing how sewing has impacted their life and how it's a dying medium. And then they ask me what I'm working on, and then I get to tell them that I'm actually working on a block that a youth has made about gun control. And so now I have this dialogue open with this complete stranger that I would never have had the opportunity to do. How many times we walk into coffee shops and everyone's on their cell phone, like everyone's on their laptops, like no one's giving this kind of critical dialogue anymore, opening spaces up for that. So that's been another benefit of volunteering, is that I can bring these out to public spaces and parks and things, and then open up dialogue with people that I don't even know, and learn from them, or have more of an awareness of their perspective. So hopefully some volunteers in the audience will be inspired by that, and you can do that too. It's pretty amazing.
Take 2 more questions. I think you had one, and then you had one. Or you just been answered? Okay.
First of all, thanks for the work you do and for sharing it. But I wonder if the folks in Paducah know about your work, and are they going to...
We have a quilt show there January 2020. The Paducah National Quilt Museum, which is like the Lamborghini in terms of cars, because he loves cars, but it's like the Lamborghini of quilting. They're giving us the smallest gallery space they have, but they did say like these 4 quilts couldn't come. But out of the 20-so quilts we do have, like that's pretty, the fact that we have any in the Paducah Museum is going to be a pretty powerful exhibit.
Juan, what do you think it was that caused the transformation for you? Was it like the actual process of doing the quilting, or was it meeting Sara, or something else?
After I had did the quilt, social justice wasn't something that I was familiar with. I was trying to get more into it. So after I had got out of the program, I actually got kicked out of the program. So I got kicked out on the last day for something I didn't do, but I ended up taking the blame for it. So it's like, once I got kicked out, I started kind of doing bad again. That was when I had caught my 3rd case. I had met up with the ED of the organization. I was actually dating his daughter, so it was like a weird kind of like gateway in. So he was like, I noticed that you're getting in trouble. Like, I'm about to start this organization, because the organization was new at the time. It was only probably like 3 years old and only had like 3 staff members. I was a paid intern, and I wasn't really like too familiar with like the policies and all the advocacy that they was doing with behind the work, and like, because they really push for like policy and like fair like rights for everybody. So like one of the bills that we had proposed to pass was like SB 392, which is like the alternative action bill, which is like police need to use like any alternative use of like force before they pull out a gun. Like that should be like their last reaction. So like that's one that we push for. So going into it initially, like I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I started doing the work. I started meeting like the kids, and I ended up liking them, because it's like I'm helping kids that were in situations just like mine, but except that where I didn't have guidance, I could start guiding them. So I kind of got into helping the kids, and then more so like they kind of focused on my background. I do graffiti. I started doing it like as tag banging, which is like just throwing up your set on like neighborhood walls, and then actually got into like the art form itself, and then they kind of like was like, all right, so we could pay you to start doing murals. And I was like, that's cool. Like I started doing the murals, I started doing the work, I started getting more into it now that I was getting paid for it. So then like afterwards I started seeing like changes that we could start making to the community. So like we started actually putting money back into the community by like funding, like getting like sponsored by these shops and like starting up shops and having people come work for us. And then like the space grew from like 3 people to like 30 staff. And then I got hired as a full-time digital design associate. So now I do all the communications. I do like everything that goes out on social media. I blast out all the flyers. I do Photoshop work for every picture that we post. And like now I'm starting to like see like there's actually power in the work that we do. And like now I don't have to like do things like I don't have to rob people no more. I don't gotta sell drugs. I don't gotta bang. I don't gotta go do what I had to do. Like now it's easier. It's a real pathway. It's a real career now. Like I take it a little bit more professionally.
I think we're going to end there. Thank you all.